Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
We welcome you back to Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast here on the Nerd Party Network that explores all of the different regions and nooks and crannies and whatever else you want to call a crevice in a galactic map. I am one of your hosts, Jedi Master John Mills, and I am joined once again by my dear friend, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, I have a surprise topic for you. The listeners of this show are big fans of the surprise topics, and I want to know, are you?
Well, I'm a big fan of you stopping getting us caught in the crevice of another space worm. Can we please stop exploring those crevices, because the Minocs in here keep eating the power cables on our ship, and I'm really frustrated. And so, yes, fire away with your surprise topic, but can we just get out of here?
We can get out of here, but on the condition that people fire away their reviews over on Apple Podcasts and let us know what they think of the show. We do this for the love of the game. Give us a review for the love of the show. And of course, you can find us over on the socials at the Jedi Masters on X Twitter, the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram, and at Join Nerd Party on X Twitter. So here's the surprise topic. As everybody knows, my youngest loves Rebels. Chopper is her favorite droid, and I think maybe Chopper might be mine too. So the next logical step was, well, there's a delightful little show called The Clone Wars. You want to give that a try? And we've been easing into it, and she's been taking to it. And like all sane and rational people, we jump around. We watch the episodes in a jumble as they were released. And we very recently got to the first aired episode, Ambush, featuring Yoda and the three clones battling the droid army to try to get to King Katunko of the Toydarians. At one point during that show, Yoda sits down, has the clones take off their helmets, and says to them, "You think you look the same, but in the Force, everybody is their own person." And it made me think for a second. George Lucas himself said midichlorians alone were not the determinant factor of whether you were a Jedi. People misinterpreted midichlorians to think you had to have a certain score like an SAT to become a Jedi. He's like, no, anybody can become a Jedi. It's just easier for some people than others. And of course, the midichlorians are also a vehicle for talking about the prophecy conceived by the Force, that sort of thing. So I was thinking to myself, if that's so, if all living beings have the Force in them, is it possible that a clone of their own accord could become a Jedi?
I think that's a really interesting question. It makes me think of then, you would kind of look to Jango Fett as because, all their DNA comes from him and they're all clones of him. And of course, even, they're augmented by the Kaminoans, but, whether or not Jango kind of ever exhibited any Force sensitivity, and yes, George talks about the idea that yes, if you really put in enough dedication, you could become some semblance of a Jedi, right? You may never be the world's strongest Jedi, but you could probably do it. I think we see that kind of play out in the Ahsoka series with Sabine and her journey. The hard thing about this, though, is that, I think a clone would have had to have been given the time and the place to even try that. And as we watch through the Clone Wars, you get the episodes, and there's very few of them where clones don't just do the job that they're given, because they are so programmed. You get the deserter where that happens. And so I wonder if, because of the augmentation for personality that was given to the clones, if that wouldn't have made it very, very, very difficult, nigh near impossible for a clone to kind of reach out in that way, because they wouldn't have even just had a desire.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like that would be the first step towards that very long journey of somebody working towards being a Jedi in the first place.
Sure, I agree that it's a question of perception, where the clones are raised. They're given subliminal messaging from inside the creche. They are continually bombarded with lessons. Their growth accelerated. They're all of these things. They are conditioned. They are born to kill and serve the Republic. But within that question of will, there's still the capability. And I would point to, actually, I'll bring it back to Jango Fett. What do we see that's a core difference between Jango and Obi-Wan, for instance, in episode 2? Obi-Wan flies with a droid to get, and he has, now, yes, I know that there's a functional aspect of it. He needs somebody to talk to, so he's not just talking to himself while he's flying the fighter, all of that stuff. Take that out of it. Jango flies through the rings above Geonosis on his own, whereas Obi-Wan says flying is for droids. Not because Jedi can't fly, but even they have a little droid co-pilot that goes with them. Jango has a natural aptitude. And so my counter would be
like Han Solo.
Like Han Solo does. But that even speaks to a mindset thing. It's that inculcation of the clones are raised to be very materialist. I concede that point. But you could, if you found one like the deserter who is more open to the idea of a different type of life and mindset, I think it's possible that you could have somebody trained up. I agree, they'll never be Anakin Skywalker, but considering Jedi, according to the lore established by Lucas himself as well, the Jedi existed before knowledge of the midichlorians even existed. It was a monastic order. It was a lifestyle. It was a communing with the Force sort of thing, as opposed to the warriors that we encounter near the end of the Golden Age in the prequels.
Another question that I would think might have an implication on whether or not this would be possible. I immediately think of the idea of, does the growth acceleration that all clones are given do something to their physiology, which would also make this more difficult for them, because it's not a truly natural thing, in the same way in which, we know Anakin Skywalker was never as strong as he was beforehand because he had started to lose parts of his body and when, he had the fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi and what that did to him. And so because of that natural connection to the Force being about one's actual natural nature, does this type of manipulation have an impact on the relationship between, any midichlorians a person would have in the first place, and then therefore their connection with the Force?
I like where you're going with that. I think that growth acceleration would have a huge impact on how old, quote unquote, would a clone have to be in order to even be open to this. So let me build on what you're saying, and saying a clone, say episode 2 era, that comes out of the batch. No, I don't think there's any chance. Their growth acceleration combined with their training probably stunts their mental development, in the sense that they think a certain way and they don't have life. Like, they're intelligent and they're creative thinkers, but they're creative thinkers within a certain problem-solving mindset. But then if you go down the line and you encounter somebody, say one of the Batchers, or later on Rex after the Clone Wars are done, those are clones who have had enough of an emotional and developmental arc to have those centers of their brains fully mature to the point where they could consider the possibility of training. but there could be clones the same age that wouldn't be able to do that because they just never got to that point. Like, I would argue you could say Rex, yes, Cody, no. Because you look at where they are in their development, Cody's able to follow Order 66 without even blinking. Rex shows that development because he's able to understand something's happening that he doesn't want to do. So you have right there, actually, if you watch episode 3 and The Phantom Apprentice side by side, you see two clones of similar age and experience reacting differently to Order 66.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a big part of that, it seems to come down to the Rex is with Obi-Wan and Anakin for so long in their orbit, and then of course with Ahsoka. Cody seems to be a slightly newer addition to Obi-Wan's orbit, and therefore not quite as he hasn't had the impact on the relationship. One of the things we've always seen is the way in which the clones became more than just an automaton, basically programmed because of their relationship with the Jedi. And so in that, I think, though, that's the thing that would have opened up a clone to the possibility of Jedi training at all. And yet, because in some ways, that is the relationship between, and this is, I think, what it really came down to. That relationship between that trinity of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, they have such an impact on those clones that are in their orbit because I think they just kind of rightly show, and they're all willing to treat the clones like Yoda did, right? With in ambush with those clones, that they are more than meets the eye in some ways. And it seems like a lot of the other Jedi, they were not as close to their clones, and they weren't mean to their clones or bad to their clones or whatever, but there didn't seem to have been that personality that was given to them in that way, and so I could really see somebody like a Rex, growing into that if there had been more time, and yet, I think we can look at Sabine as a good example of how difficult this is for somebody who is not what we would consider classically force sensitive. Right. And the difficulty and the absolute dedication and focus that it takes. It's akin to, I feel like, you can become a good basketball player, right? If you really dedicate yourself to it. But there's also those people who just have that natural proclivity that also then dedicate themselves and they become masters of it. And that seems to be very much what we're kind of talking about with this idea of whether or not a clone trooper could become a Jedi in any way, shape, or form. They're probably those people who basically, when it comes to the Force, they've been dealt a pair of threes. And, Anakin has been dealt a pair of aces, right? When it comes to force sensitivity. And so each one, if applying themselves, could become a Jedi. But it's definitely going to be a much more difficult road for the person who's dealt a pair of threes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as we sit here and we talk about it, I mean, obviously we agree. Yeah, under the right circumstances, right application, right work at it. We also know that midichlorian levels can't be directly manipulated. They're resistant to it. There's a lot of subtle exploration in the Bad Batch, which will, I suspect, play into all of our speculations about how Palpatine was engineering his own shot at immortality, inspired by things like Dark Empire.
Yeah.
In
and
old EU.
Excuse me for interrupting, but Omega is an example of somebody that we know to be more force sensitive than other clones, right? There's that hint in the series that
right. She would be more open to the experimentation. We also
which is
know
what
that,
made her incredibly special.
And we know that Grogu somehow tied into Moff Gideon's experiments to try to make clones of himself that were force sensitive.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there was something about Omega that had it had gotten close.
Mm-hmm.
It had gotten much closer than Palpatine had ever been before. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And what it means for me is I think I want more about Omega as a character because I feel like she really truly is in some ways an answer to a lot of these questions that we have about the ability of clones and their force sensitivity and what could happen, and something about her in the cloning process allowed her to have a better reception to the Force. You know, I don't know if somebody was holding her antennas or something while she was being cloned, but her reception was definitely better.
Well, I think that with Omega, it does. What's so fascinating is, you know, we switch into Omega. You're right. There's the whole cloning aspect of that, and the fact that she was cloned with the idea that the Kaminoans would be able to use her as leverage with the Emperor. Of course, that never works out right. But while you're talking about that, of course, I want more Omega stories. I need more Omega stories in my life. I do. I would be happy as a pig in slop if they were to say, oh, you know what? New limited series with Omega, or like, oh, hey, Omega is going to show up in Ahsoka season 2. I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking now, and I know this is going down the rabbit hole, but this is what you triggered in my brain. Wouldn't it be so cool also, because we know that a lot of this, the cloning and Omega and this discussion about how receptive clones could be to force training and stuff like that, wouldn't it be so interesting to have a series? You could make a really spooky Star Wars series, make it animated, make it live action, whatever you want to do. And what it is it's almost like a Twilight Zone type of thing, but the tying thread is that somehow, you communicate to the audience that Palpatine's grip on the material world is extended through these, whether it's clones, whether it's something else, these clones and artifacts and stuff like that keep him going. And it's like he can possess somebody for a short amount of time, but then he loses it. And it's like, it's this, like, wouldn't that be like a great, 10 episode series? But along the way, he could find an old clone who has been decommissioned and has gone off and is like, fine, I'm done with everything. I'm going to go off nowhere. And then all of a sudden his life gets subsumed by, Palpatine, Sidious's spirit. Yeah. And we get even more, more background to that, so the clone,
I think we talked about here on the show that Darth Vader comic series, and
the artifact with the old Sith,
exactly, and so that idea of that there was some way to kind of pass some sort of essence along, and so I think that's something that you absolutely could see, but I think the interesting part about this question is that it does open up a lot of possibilities, but I also just think it reminds me of just how much storytelling there still is to tell with somebody like an Omega, where there are still so many questions that we don't have answered about her, and I hope and pray that at some point we will get more content with her, and so we can really kind of dive into some of those mysteries, because I think a lot of those mysteries surrounding that whole, everything that was even happening there on Mount Tantus, right, is fascinating stuff. And it's the thing that, obviously Filoni and the creators of the Bad Batch were using to kind of help tie into the whole sequel series in general, and then try and create cohesion between everything. And it's a totally fascinating story because, it completely ties into the whole idea of the Sith desire to stay with the material and
to
discount.
Cheat death.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that way, it's something akin to something we were kind of talking about before we started recording. But it's the same problem that, Voldemort has in Harry Potter, which is that you think that death is the ultimate enemy. And so that whole storyline is incredibly interesting. It's the thing that, makes then all the stories we got with Yoda and learning from Qui-Gon and putting all that together. I mean, it's just, I think there's so many fun mysteries about the Force that are really exciting. And so, it's one of the fun things about, as we tie in as well to where we are in the Ahsoka series and, them being left in the other galaxy, and the fact that there's a connection with the Mortis gods there, and there's also Sabine being trained and everything. I just think all of that is so fascinating, and it makes me very excited for the fact that we'll be able to continue these stories in Star Wars, and it just goes to show how many great stories are still left in the Star Wars galaxy to mine.
Absolutely. There are a lot of great stories left to mine, and there are also a lot of great ways to harass you online. So, Matt, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Well, if you're up for it, you can find me on social media under the name MattRushing02. If I'm on the platform, that's my name. You can also find me here on the network with a completed show about the Harry Potter series called Owl Post, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series. You can also find me over on the TFM network with a lot of different shows. One is the 602 Club, is talking about all of the franchises that we love. Plus, a lot of great Star Trek talk over there. So please do go over there and check that out. Now, John, when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your reception to the Force, where can people find you?
Oh, well, I'm receiving lots of the Force online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. And you can find me right here on the network co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser. Have a lot of fun doing that. But Matt, I think that they are a little angry about my vials that I left for my experiments back at the Jedi Temple. So I'm going to have to ask you, can we please close these negotiations?
Well, John, we better get back, so negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.